Most disasters destroy. A flood scatters, a fire consumes, an earthquake shakes a city into rubble and leaves you guessing at what stood there before. A volcano does something stranger and, in a way, far more cruel. It does not erase a city. It freezes it. It seals a place under ash and stone so completely and so suddenly that everything stops exactly where it was. The bread stays in the oven. The cup stays on the table. The expression stays on the face. What a volcano leaves behind is not ruins in the ordinary sense. It is a photograph, three-dimensional and horribly detailed, of an ordinary day that never ended. What follows are 6 cities that were frozen in time by fire. 5 of them are ancient. The last one happened within living memory, and its streets are still sealed off today. Begin with the most famous frozen city in the world because it set the pattern for all the rest. In the year 79, on the Bay of Naples in Italy, the town of Pompeii was a busy, prosperous Roman city of perhaps 10 to 20,000 people. It had paved streets with stepping stones, bakeries and bars, painted villas, a forum, and a grand amphitheater. Looming over it was a green and pleasant mountain that no one thought of as a threat. The Romans did not even have a clear idea of what a volcano was. That mountain was Vesuvius, and in the late summer of that year, it woke up. The eruption was catastrophic. Vesuvius blasted a column of ash and pumice kilometers into the sky, and for hours it rained down on Pompeii, piling up in the streets, collapsing roofs under its weight. Then came the truly deadly part. Surges of superheated gas and ash, called pyroclastic flows, raced down the mountain at hundreds of kilometers an hour, killing almost instantly anyone still left in the town. When it was over, Pompeii was gone, buried under several meters of volcanic debris, and it stayed buried and half forgotten for nearly 1,700 years. We even have an eyewitness. A young Roman named Pliny the Younger watched the eruption from across the bay, and later wrote it all down in a pair of letters, describing the strange cloud shaped like an umbrella pine, the darkness that fell at midday, and the panic of the crowds. His own uncle, the famous naturalist Pliny the Elder, sailed toward the disaster to help, and to see it up close, and died on the shore, overcome by the fumes. Because of those letters, we do not just have the ruins of Pompeii. We have a running account of the sky going black over it, written by a frightened teenager who lived. What makes Pompeii unforgettable is what the excavators eventually discovered, and how they discovered it. As the bodies of the victims decayed inside the hardened ash, they left behind hollow cavities in the exact shape of the person who had died. In the 19th century, an archaeologist realized he could pump liquid plaster into those cavities, let it set, and then dig away the surrounding rock. What emerged were casts, not statues, but the precise final forms of real human beings, caught in their last moment. A person shielding their face, a family huddled together, a dog straining against its chain. Pompeii is not moving because it is old. It is moving because it is intimate, and that intimacy is everywhere in the town. The walls are covered in graffiti, election slogans, rude jokes, declarations of love, a boast about a good meal. Loaves of bread were found still sitting in the ovens where the bakers left them, some even stamped with the baker's name. There were fast food counters with round holes for jars of hot food, gardens with fountains, and shops with their goods still on the shelves. Pompeii is not a solemn ruin. It is a living town that was switched off in the middle of a completely ordinary afternoon. The second city was killed by the very same eruption on the very same day. But it died differently, and in one strange way was preserved even better. A short distance from Pompeii, closer to the volcano, sat the smaller and wealthier seaside town of Herculaneum. On that first day, the wind carried most of the falling ash away from it. So while Pompeii was being buried, Herculaneum was mostly spared the rain of debris. Its people may have believed they had been lucky. They had not. Late in the eruption, the pyroclastic surges came for Herculaneum too, and they came with such heat that they killed the townspeople instantly, and then sealed the town under more than 20 meters of hot volcanic material. That intense heat and deep burial gave Herculaneum a ghostly gift. In Pompeii, organic materials mostly rotted away. In Herculaneum, they were carbonized, turned to black carbon, and preserved. Wooden beams, wooden furniture, doors, even food survived as charred but intact objects. Most remarkable of all was a private library of papyrus scrolls, hundreds of them blackened into fragile lumps of charcoal. For centuries they were unreadable because unrolling them destroyed them. Only now, using powerful scanners and artificial intelligence to read the layers without opening them, are researchers beginning to recover the words. In the last couple of years, a global contest of scientists and students has coaxed the first real passages of text out of these charred lumps. They are reading a Roman writer discussing music, food, and pleasure on scrolls no human eye has seen open in nearly 2,000 years. These scrolls came from a single grand mansion now called the Villa of the Papyri, the only library to survive intact from the entire ancient world. And here is the tantalizing part. Only part of that villa has ever been dug out. Many scholars believe hundreds or even thousands more scrolls may still lie unopened in the unexcavated rooms below. A buried bookshelf of lost ancient works, waiting in the dark to be found. And, at last, to be read. And Herculaneum held one more grim correction. For a long time, people assumed its residents had mostly escaped by sea. Then, in the 1980s, excavators reached the old shoreline and found the boat chambers along the beach packed with skeletons, around 300 of them. Families crowded together where they had run to wait for rescue boats that never came. They had fled to the water, and the heat found them there. The third frozen city is far older than the Romans, and its destruction may have echoed all the way into legend. On the Greek island now called Santorini, around 3,500 years ago, there was a sophisticated Bronze Age town that we call Akrotiri. It belonged to the Minoan world, the brilliant early civilization centered on nearby Crete. Akrotiri was no village. It had multi-story buildings, indoor plumbing, and walls covered in beautiful, vivid frescoes of ships, animals, and people. And it sat directly on top of one of the most dangerous volcanoes on Earth. Around 1600 BC, that volcano, Thera, detonated in one of the largest eruptions in human history. It was so violent that it blew the center out of the island, leaving the great flooded crater that gives Santorini its dramatic shape today. The blast was on a scale that is hard to imagine, hurling many cubic kilometers of rock into the sky and sending tsunamis racing across the Aegean. Its effects may have reached far beyond Greece. Some researchers have linked it to strange cold spells and failed harvests recorded in distant lands. Traces of a single island explosion briefly nudging the climate of the whole northern hemisphere. It was a local catastrophe with a global shadow. Akrotiri was buried under many meters of ash, and like Pompeii, it was preserved in extraordinary detail. But here, there's a haunting difference. So far, almost no human bodies and very little of the town's treasure have been found in the ruins. It seems the people of Akrotiri felt the warning earthquakes, understood what they meant, and fled before the end, taking their valuables with them. They saved themselves and left their whole town behind as a perfect empty stage. What they left is breathtaking. The frescoes on the walls of Akrotiri are among the finest to survive from the entire Bronze Age, painted in blues and reds and ochres that are still vivid today. One shows a spring landscape of red lilies and darting swallows. Another, a long miniature frieze, depicts a whole fleet of ships in a grand procession between towns, crowded with tiny figures, a moving picture of a seafaring world 3,500 years old. Some scholars have even wondered whether the distant memory of this rich island civilization, swallowed by the sea in a day, helped inspire Plato's story of a great island power called Atlantis that sank beneath the waves. fourth city takes us across the ocean to prove that this frozen fate was not only a European story. In what is now El Salvador, around the year 660, there was a small Maya farming village called Joya de Cerén. It was not a city of kings or pyramids. It was an ordinary place where ordinary people grew maize and beans, kept their tools, and lived their daily lives. Then a nearby volcanic vent erupted right beside it and buried the entire village under meters of ash. Because it was so ordinary and so perfectly sealed, Joya de Cerén became something priceless. Archaeologists often uncover the temples and tombs of the powerful, but the daily life of common people usually vanishes without a trace. Here it did not. The ash preserved the houses, the gardens still planted in their rows, the storerooms with food still inside, painted gourds, sleeping mats, and even the remains of a meal left mid-preparation. It is often called the Pompeii of the Americas, and it offers one of the clearest windows we have anywhere into how everyday people actually lived more than 1,000 years ago. The site was found by accident in 1976 when a bulldozer leveling ground for grain silos cut into a buried clay building. Since then, archaeologists have uncovered houses, workshops, a communal steam bath, and gardens so well preserved that researchers could identify the exact crops in the fields. Among them were neat rows of manioc, the earliest clearly documented manioc field known in the Americas. Remarkably, as at Akrotiri, no bodies have been found inside the village, suggesting the people had just enough warning to run into the night. The fifth city is one of the oldest on this list, and its killer was not ash but a slow river of stone. In the Valley of Mexico, on the southern edge of what is now the vast sprawl of Mexico City, stood Cuicuilco. Well over 2,000 years ago, it was one of the very first true cities in the Americas. It was a major center with a distinctive round, stepped pyramid at its heart, home to many thousands of people long before the more famous cities of the region rose to power. It was, for its time and place, a capital of the early world. Its great circular pyramid is one of the oldest monumental structures in all of the Americas. A stack of stone tiers that people were climbing to worship while much of the world was still deep in prehistory. Around it spread a city of streets, platforms, and farmland supporting a large and growing population. For a while, Cuicuilco and the young city of Teotihuacan to the north were rivals, two centers competing to dominate the valley. Its end came from a volcano called Citl. When Citl erupted, it sent out vast flows of lava that spread across the landscape and eventually swallowed Cuicuilco and its fields under a thick, black shield of hardened rock. That lava field, called the Pedregal, is so hard and so extensive that parts of it were still bare and rugged when modern Mexico City grew out toward it. And a great university campus was eventually built directly on the ancient volcanic stone. Unlike soft ash, lava is unforgiving and permanent, and much of the ancient city remains locked beneath solid stone to this day, with only its great round pyramid rising back into the light. The destruction of Cuicuilco may have done more than end one city. Many of its displaced survivors are thought to have moved north, helping to swell the population of a rising new metropolis called Teotihuacan, which would go on to become one of the largest cities on Earth. One city died under the lava, and from its refugees, a greater one may have grown. The sixth and final city is the one that should unsettle us the most, because it did not happen in the distant past. It happened in the lifetime of people reading this. On the small Caribbean island of Montserrat, a British territory, sat a pretty colonial capital called Plymouth. It had government buildings, shops, homes, a harbor, everything a functioning modern town needs. And behind it rose the green Soufriere Hills, a volcano that had been quiet for centuries. In 1995, it woke up. Over the next 2 years, the volcano buried Plymouth in ash and mud and pyroclastic flows, in a slow-motion replay of Pompeii playing out on the evening news. The city had to be completely abandoned, and the danger was real. not theoretical. In 1997, a series of pyroclastic flows swept areas that had been left in a buffer zone, and 19 people who had stayed behind or slipped back to tend their land were killed. A modern echo of the crowds caught at Pompeii. The island's airport was destroyed, its capital was lost, and a large share of the population simply left Montserrat for good, their town erased from daily life in a single generation. Today, more than half of Montserrat is a designated exclusion zone, off-limits and empty, and Plymouth sits inside it, a modern ghost town half swallowed by gray volcanic mud. Its rooftops poking out of the hardened ash, it is the only modern capital city to be abandoned to a volcano. It stands as a strange, quiet mirror of Pompeii, showing us in full color and with photographs and video exactly the kind of thing that happened on the Bay of Naples 2,000 years ago. So, set the 6 of them side by side. A Roman city with the casts of the dying. A seaside town whose scrolls we are only now learning to read. A Bronze Age island of frescoes that emptied itself just in time. A Maya farming village with the meal still on the table. An early American capital sealed forever under black lava ... and a modern colonial town abandoned to the ash within living memory. Different centuries, different continents, different peoples. The same mountain, wearing 100 different names. But look at what the volcanoes actually gave us, because this is the strange twist at the heart of every one of these stories. In destroying these places, the eruptions also preserve them, more completely and more honestly than any museum ever could. We know more about daily life in Pompeii than in almost any other Roman city precisely because it was buried alive. We can read a Roman's private library only because it was burned into carbon. We can see a Maya family's kitchen only because it was sealed under falling ash. The volcano is the cruelest archaeologist there is, and also, in its way, the most thorough. And that is the thought these frozen cities really leave us with. We tend to imagine the deep past as vague and far away, populated by shadowy figures we can never really know. These places tell us something different and far more human. That 2,000 years ago, or 3,500 years ago, people were baking bread, tending gardens, reading books, and living ordinary days exactly like ours. Then an ordinary day became their last one. In an instant, with no warning, they were prepared to believe. Plymouth reminds us that the mountains have not finished. And every one of these silent, frozen cities is asking us the same quiet question. If it came for them on a day just like any other, what makes us so sure it will never come for us?